Your grandfather's art speaks about the Jewish experience in the Soviet Union. So how did his work shape your understanding of the position of Jews in Soviet society? And did it shape your own Jewish identity, do you think?
Very much so. Very much so. It came later when I grew up with his paintings, but my first memory, my first sense of his paintings came before my conscious memory. I spent the first year of my life in his studio, and the view, we were on the top floor of a 6-story building, and the view from the window was all black roofs, but you turn your head inward and there is beautiful, bright, colorful images that probably as a baby I didn't know what they were, but there was the sense of joy and color in this work. I didn't know I knew almost nothing about what these paintings meant. Some of the paintings I would see in the museums and in the permanent installations and public buildings, but they were part of his collection, part of his paintings that could never be exhibited in the Soviet Union. And the guests would come into our home to see this work. To speak about his father's portrait, if you look at it, if you put it on a screen and you look, it's a perfectly realist sketch of his father that Felix Lembersky created when he was still a student in the 1930s, fairly soon after the revolution, when the Soviets were fighting, when dialectical materialism was the game, and atheism was promoted, and religion was fought tooth and nail. And if you look very carefully, I always ask the audiences, what do you see? What is so unusual about this drawing? And first they say, well, it's a man on a chair reading a book. But if you look very carefully, there is a shadow cast by his figure. But the shadow doesn't look. It's not a reflection of the man. It looks right back at him. And behind that shadow, there is another shadow looking back at this man. And behind that, there is a portal, some kind of doorway that you don't know what it is. And so it's a fundamentally anti-socialist realist painting, anti-Soviet, anti-communist, because it suggests that there is a presence of something that exists in a parallel dimension with the material world. Well, this painting in fact is a detail of his self-portrait that was created in 1944 or 45 at the end of the war. And at that point, he had survived the siege of Leningrad. He was wounded. He had served bringing supplies into the city, taking the horse carts across the frozen Lake Ladoga from when Leningrad was besieged in 1941 by the Nazis, and the siege continued for 900 days. And I think that the detail, the fact that you picked up that his eyes are washed, it is as if he is blinded by he cannot see. And I don't know, to me this is a very powerful image of the war,
of grief and loss.
Yeah. So this painting was created in 1964, and it is one of his last paintings. And usually the first thing people see and respond to is this beautiful color, which is probably true of most of his later work. And it's a lovely scene with the church, with the Orthodox church onion dome in the background, the river and the fence in the foreground, and steeped in the yellow sunlight. And the yellow color has two meanings, right? So then that's the first impression is just really visceral joy of the color. But then there is a symbolism. So in the Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox icon, the gold is a sign, right? The symbol of divine, the gilded background. And in the Jewish history, the yellow star was used by the Nazis, so it has a two-point thing. He had made a choice, I think, to never abandon spiritual and religious connection. I think it was his conscious choice. I think that when the Soviets enforced atheism. I believe that art, music, visual art became a vessel through which people could express some of the sentiment. And I think the more the Soviets pressed for atheism, and the more they suppressed religious practice, I think the more there was a counterwave that maybe undercurrent in the society, and definitely in my family,